Shalom, shalom, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Pulse of Israel here in our eternal and ancestral homeland, the land of Israel, in our beautiful, biblical, ancestral, and indivisible capital, Jerusalem, since King David's time. Today I'm speaking with Olga Deutsch, who is the vice president of NGO Monitor. NGO Monitor, well, just think about that name. NGO, that refers to non-government organizations, like nonprofits. Monitor. Yes, this is an organization that was established, founded in Israel in order to monitor nonprofit organizations, because many of you might know this, others might not. They are a real source of the funding behind a lot of the anti-Israel and anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic activities that have been taking place around the world, not for years, but for decades. So it is wonderful having you, Olga, to be able to speak with you today. Shalom.
Shalom. Thanks so much for having me.
It is a pleasure, and I think the best way to start is, why don't I just give my little intro about what high-level NGO Monitor. Can you go a little deep dive? What's the importance of NGO Monitor?
It was a perfect elevator pitch, so thank you for that.
Wonderful.
But that's about it. I mean, I can give you the before October the 7th and after October the 7th
okay. Please, that's good.
Line. I think after October the 7th, I say we defend Israel's right to exist within the human rights space.
Wow.
Think for that for a moment. Now, before October the 7th, it would take me an additional 5 minutes to explain that. But I think after October the 7th, there's not a single person who's Jewish or Israeli, and has not felt on his or her skin that we were failed, abandoned, underrepresented, not advocated for, not fought for, right, by the broader human rights community. Now, when we say human rights community, it's the UN, it's our governments, it's the media, it's the academia, it's the think tanks, it's the broader public, right? So we try to populate that place. Now, we focus on those who who define themselves as human rights and humanitarian activists, but instead of doing that, they promote anti-Semitic, hateful, violent to Jews narratives, and oftentimes have ties to Palestinian terror groups and promote their narratives. And the main driving force behind all of these political attacks, I call it political warfare against Israel and the Jewish people, are the NGOs. And they come in different sizes and shapes. Some of them are huge, and everyone has heard of them, like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch and Oxfam. And I'm sure many of your viewers in the past, at least, maybe considered donating to them, because we all grew up believing that they feed the hungry and,
they care about human rights.
Exactly, they care about human rights. Now, some others are a bunch of Palestinian organizations that most haven't heard of, most certainly before October the 7th. And some are like random groups like Kurve Wustra, a German group that even in Germany no one has heard of. The common denominator that they all have is that they deal with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and within that context abuse their self-proclaimed agenda to promote human rights. Now, sadly, many of them are funded through official development and humanitarian aid projects, which is humanitarian aid, your taxpayers' dollars.
You're talking about government funding.
Yes. So we research their activities, we put them in reports, and we share these reports with elected officials and governments, and we try to basically tell them, you might think that you're promoting peace and that you're bringing about democracy, or building better societies or building infrastructure, but in practice you're adding a battlefield to Israel in parallel to the physical fronts, Iran, Lebanon, Houthis, Gaza. I can go on and on.
Right.
There's an additional one, and it's a political front that is a truly existential one for Israel, because there's an ongoing campaign that tries to, on one hand, normalize, even romanticize Palestinian terrorists, and at the same time portray us as the pariah state.
Right.
And that's where we reside.
And just to give people be able to grasp what we're referring to, because we're referring to nonprofit organizations who get funding, and a lot of government funding, not just individual funding. What are we talking about? Hundreds of thousands? Millions, billions, trillions of dollars over the years? How much money are all these different NGOs all over the world? Again, America, I mean, Americans now are waking up to U.S. aid. Now that's been used to fund Hamas and the Palestinian Authority by U.S. governments for decades, but there are many all over Europe and around the world. How much money are we talking about that's been used against the Jews all these years?
Well, that's an excellent question. You're good at this. That is one of the least transparent industries, we like to call it as such, in the world. There's no one database that compiles or even publishes, funding to NGOs, not only in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but in general. I'll share something that was just published today in a Brussels EU-based paper, and that is that EU alone, not in general, not in our context, spent 7 billion euros, that would be like 7 point something billion dollars, between 2021 and 2023 on NGOs. I'll just leave you with that number. Okay. Now, multiply that with other countries, right? And it's a huge, huge, huge industry. But unlike the public sector, with our elected officials and administrations, and unlike the private sector, where we demand transparency and we demand accountability and we take down our leaders over one tweet. Right. When it comes to the NGOs, to the civil society, absolutely all rules, all criteria go through the window. And they enjoy this halo, they promote human rights. And so on top of no transparency, so we don't really know, but we do know that the numbers are huge. Let me share another number with you.
Please.
The United Nations launched an emergency appeal for the last quarter of 2023 for Gaza alone, which means that it's for the 3 months following October the 7th. Now, let's zoom out. Hundreds and thousands of rockets coming out of Gaza onto Israel. Israel, it's the peak of its military operation, right? Hezbollah starts also its operation. They say, hundreds of thousands of displaced in Gaza, major humanitarian catastrophe. The UN is demanding from the international community, which is 30 developed countries, $1.4 billion in emergency aid to Gaza. You and all the viewers will want you want to believe that it will go to food, medication, water, the essentials. They stated 3 objectives that they will want to address. The third one was political advocacy.
In Gaza, in the middle of a war.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, some will want you to believe that means women's rights, right? Rights of a Gaza child to healthcare. Although, in the 3 months after October the 7th, who is advocating and to whom for these in Gaza? But that's not even that. Political advocacy means money going to Palestinian non-governmental organizations who define themselves as human rights, and they file submissions against us at the International Criminal Court in The Hague and the International Court of Justice in The Hague. They lobby Congress and governments around the world. They immediately launched the apartheid libel, the genocide libel, the starvation libel. They immediately started, obviously, tracking our soldiers to prepare the campaign to hunt them down right around the world, and so on and so on. So it truly is a political front, a political warfare against us.
And you said $1.4 billion given by the United Nations towards all this.
Well, to 3 objectives. Again, there's absolutely no transparency. We don't know how much went to political advocacy, but it's one of the 3 objectives. So clearly, if even 1/3 of it went to it, it is an unbelievable amount.
And then I imagine other money, since its target is Gaza, and anyone who knows that any money going to Gaza goes directly into the pockets of Hamas. So that's international funding, United Nations, in the middle of a war where the Jewish state of Israel and Israelis are the victims. The United Nations international community is giving money to the aggressor, to the terrorists.
Absolutely. Now, the entire humanitarian aid community will have you believe that, the humanitarian principle trumps it all. Meaning, and many major humanitarian aid organizations have not only advocated but tried to lobby governments to do exactly that, to relax anti-terror vetting mechanisms like the Norwegian Refugee Council, one of the biggest global aid organizations, because they'll say, as long as we actually reach the targeted population, some money going to terrorists in a conflict-ridden area is a collateral. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but this is the spirit in which they do that. Now, as we speak, and this is since October the 7th, every government, the democratic liberal country in the world, has designated Hamas and said no money. They froze funding, launched reviews and evaluations. As we speak, USAID and the EU and the British government and a bunch of other governments are giving cash aid allocations in Gaza to households based on lists of priorities provided by a Hamas-led Ministry of Social Development. I'm deliberately saying this slowly because I have said it already so many times, and yet every time I say it, I myself find it difficult to believe. I just returned from Brussels, where I had a series of high-profile meetings in the European Parliament. I don't know how many of your viewers and listeners know, but there's a new parliament in Brussels, because they had elections last June.
Okay.
So it was very timely and very important, because Brussels is soul searching right now. The European Union wants to know what is the role that they might play, because both Jerusalem and Washington, after the new administration, after Trump came into the White House, they sort of marginalized them and said, you guys have been pretty biased.
Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you. So, you're not really a stakeholder here. At the same time, they are the biggest donor to the PA, historically.
To the Palestinian Authority.
To the Palestinian Authority. They are the single largest aid donor globally, and the same is also the case when it comes to the Palestinians. So in theory, they can play a big role. Now, when I sat down with the director of the MENA department, which is Middle East and North, like the department in the European Union's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. There's a very complicated name to it, but that's basically what it is.
In charge of this area.
Exactly. And I said this to her about the cash allocations. She looks at me and she says, deadly serious, she says, oh, she's French, but after October the 7th, we check every family one by one. And I looked at her and I said, from Brussels? How do you do that? I mean, so it's very emblematic of the challenge, right? Some will say cut all aid. Most will say around the world, no matter what, there's a humanitarian crisis, and release all aid because we have to prevent people from dying there. The truth is always somewhere in between, meaning it's not ours to decide here in Israel whether governments will provide aid. That's their call, right? And of the people who vote in those countries. But if they provide aid, they have to condition it. If they don't, it will just keep going to Hamas and other Palestinian terror organizations, and nothing on the ground will change. October the 7th didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened in an environment in which hate is the norm. There's nothing else. And the generations and generations there were brainwashed, indoctrinated that the occupation and Israel is the single culprit for everything, for all their problems and ills. And the history will judge the international community whether they will use the crisis right now as an opportunity to change a paradigm. Now, speaking of the European Union, they officially promote the two-state solution. When I sit down with them and say... Still today, in every statement, even the statement on October the 7th of the massacre, if you read what they say, so they will say, we condemn in the strongest of terms the massacre and the atrocities, while we are committed to a two-state solution for both Israelis and Palestinians. Right. So that is nothing has changed.
No lesson learned.
No, nothing has changed there.
Right.
When I meet with them, I say that it's not mine to comment on that. But there is absolutely no way that after October the 7th, when you say that line, you only mean Palestinians' right for a state. Now, Germany has been one of the greatest allies of Israel in Europe since October the 7th. But not only in terms of statements, because statements are necessary, but they're the easy part, when a politician gets on a stage and makes a very supportive statement. Germany in November, in the context of our conversation, passed a resolution which is a legally binding one, saying no German funds will go on the soil of Germany or outside of the borders to any entity or individual who does not recognize Israel's right to exist. It's a historical shift in paradigm. Now, to anyone here, it's like, it's 2025, why do we need to say it out loud?
Right.
But we do, because if we don't...
Interesting. So I want to touch upon that for a second, because it's very interesting. So on the one hand, I totally hear your point about it being historic, and especially for Germany. And yes, out of all the Western European countries, Germany has been our closest ally. Yet, correct me if I'm wrong, out of all the Western European countries, I think to this day, Germany has been one of the biggest donors to all of the NGOs that are virulently anti-Israel, not just Palestinian Authority, but others. So when I talk about Germany, I call out their hypocrisy and their two-facedness. Like on the one hand, they play it up as if they're an ally, and I'm sure there are some, and I actually know some German politicians who are our allies, but they're more on the right and they're not in power in Germany. But in terms of the German government, they're able to say, yeah, we support Israel, we're supportive of Israel, international community, yada, 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 and decisions like this. But then at the same time, they are literally funding terror and organizations that support terror against us. And I'm sure you know as well as I do, all that information is out there, and they are ignoring it, whether willingly or not. So, love to hear what's...
Well, it's like in any country, right? They say one thing, they do different things. There's also a difference between a parliament or Congress in the U.S. and the administration, hence USAID. Let's zoom into what's going on in D.C. now.
Right.
It is the elected officials saying the administration hasn't done, in-house cleanup in a very long time.
Right.
Let's take a look. It doesn't necessarily even say that all that USAID does is bad or unnecessary. But when was the last time that anyone truly checked
right.
and has shaken the... So pretty much is the same in Germany as well, meaning the administration doesn't like to say that they did anything wrong. The last thing that any administration wants to say is like, yeah, we evaluated, guess what, we were wrong. No administration will publicly say that unless they're pushed either by the media or by the elected officials, right? By the parliaments. So you have a German parliament that legislates something like that, by basically further regulating and limiting the maneuvering space of the administration. Because the Germans Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of Development, there they have two ministries that fund. And then you have the church aid organizations who also get governmental money to do pretty much the same and fund pretty much the same organizations. But the parliament, the Bundestag, is now saying, no, we're going to put conditions on that. And you will now have to actually have these organizations sign up on this. After they legislated, there was actually in Israeli media, one of the organizations, they complained on their social media and they said, we were summoned by the German embassy in Tel Aviv and we were asked repeatedly, do you recognize Israel's right to exist? And because they couldn't say yes, the embassy said, well, we are very sorry to tell you, but your grant is being terminated. I mean, just pause for a second. Like, this is an Israeli organization, pro-Palestinian one, fair enough. We're a democracy, I have my personal opinion on that. But we live in a thriving democracy, so we have to be able to contain the fact that, the different voices. But it's an Israeli organization sitting in an embassy in Tel Aviv and cannot say that they recognize Israel's right to exist in order to get hundreds of thousands of euros in a grant from Germany. That is everything that is wrong with that. I think that's the essence of the story. And if we don't clean that up, because today wars are not only waged with weapons. You have a situation today where IDF is not only worrying about, do we have enough weapons on stock? Do we have enough troops? What is going to be our tactics? Or, who are we going to, which border to deploy our troops to, and so on. But they're actually thinking, are our soldiers being persecuted globally? Are they going to be arrested if they travel to clear their mind after...
I'll just give you a personal anecdote. I will not fly to Europe. I'm an active reserve soldier in the IDF, proudly so, and I post pictures, and I personally will not stop posting pictures or give messages out there and video messages. And because of that, I'm afraid of consequences of landing in Europe, and I won't travel to Europe.
So you understand that for you, that's bad enough, right? That it's limiting. You might say, I don't want to travel, but it's limiting. It is definitely an impediment to you. But think of IDF as such, where they have to think of these things. They need to have a department or a unit researching, looking, legal advisors. It is really an additional front, and I'm not sure that enough people give it enough of importance and enough of thought.
Right. Wow. So what? So I want to stick with you on your recent trip to Brussels, because on the one hand there is the fact that many of these officials in Europe are still not willing to say that Hamas is persona non grata, and they're allowing their own taxpayer money to be given to Gaza that we all know is given to Hamas. But you're also there talking about their funding of the Palestinian Authority, which the first thing that nobody cares about, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, 30 years they're giving financial aid. And they're supposed to be an independent governing body that's given proof to the world that it can stand on its own two legs, that it's developed an economy, that it gets own tax incomes, so that it doesn't need financial income. And to me, that's like the biggest sign that, no, there's anti-Semitism behind this funding. There's no way any country around the world will be continuing to give billions of dollars of financial aid to a country in Africa if it has not succeeded in standing on its own two legs. No. And again, my perspective is, no. There is inherent Jew hatred behind this, and it's very, very sad. But I want to hear what your perspective is in talking to these officials and the continued funding to the Palestinian Authority, which you and I both know is a terror organization, continues. It has a pay-to-slay program. America is not allowed, it's forbidden to give funding so long as they fund terror. We know it funds terror. We know its educational programs. We know its television programs. All educates to terror. And yet, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's still being ignored by the decision makers continuing to give these funding in Europe.
Cool. So it's like 10 different questions in one. Okay, so I'm European, so full disclosure, so I cannot say that Europeans are inherently anti-Semitic. I truly don't believe in that. I actually, when I engage...
I wasn't saying all Europeans.
No, I know, but most people I know and most people I talk to in Europe are actually quite friendly, or at worst, ignorant. Think of it, just think of how much of the primetime news at 8:30 p.m. in Israel, how much of the time is allocated for non-Israel related news from Europe. And now, yes, Israel is disproportionately reported on everywhere, and it's still a few minutes. So most people are busy with their lives. So at worst, let's put it that way, they're ignorant, they don't know, and they're maybe fed by the headlines and whatever. Now, talking about governments, I think it's literally a matter of breaking paradigms. Europe is very slow to change a paradigm, and Brussels has adopted this paradigm, and they just don't know how to divorce. To break out of it, which is they're going to bring about peace. It's a two-state solution. That is the only way about it. They decided a long time ago that the Palestinian Authority is the most liable and the only partner. And actually, in order to fortify that old paradigm that proved completely flawed, right? They now figured, not only have they figured, but actually Hamas having committed October the 7th only strengthened that, because, Hamas bad, PA good. That's sort of the dichotomy of the paradigm, of the official paradigm in Brussels. Now, but that's not even my point. Okay, that's a political reality. My point is that when you give so much money, and the European Union has only in 2024 provided 500 million euros in emergency humanitarian aid alone to Gaza. This is just an emergency humanitarian aid package. This is not development. This is not human rights. None of the soft power things. They continue. They keep thinking that if they keep throwing money, that something's going to change. Now, I said I'm from Europe. I'm more specific. I'm from Serbia. I did not grow up in a democracy. I grew up in a country that was torn by wars multiple times, and I wasn't born. I was born in a communist country that then was a dictatorship, then went through wars, and then overthrew its dictator and had the whole rebirth and whatever, and is still soul searching and trying to learn how to be a democracy, and it's an ongoing process. And that is my point, and I always stress that out. I say, when you give money, you cannot give it as an open check.
Right.
There are two sides, two parts of a lesson about democracy. The part about your rights is the easy one. Everyone gets that. And the Palestinians have understood that one within a minute. What do I get? What can I receive from this money? I get grants, I have funding, I have money to build, what do I get? But no one has set them down in a properly planned, coordinated, long-term process with predefined milestones and progress tracking to teach them what are the responsibilities of any one citizen and institution in a democratic society, because one does not go without the other. And the European Union continues to send money with absolutely no
strings
demands
attached
and no strings attached. And that is we might not like here in Israel a lot of the things that go on there, but let's be realistic. We cannot expect them to wake up one morning and say, we love Israelis. I don't believe that will ever happen.
But at least the demand, you want our funding?
You will
totally new education books. You're not educating in your math problems about how many Jews you're killing.
Exactly, and you're not inciting to violence.
You're not paying terrorists and terrorist families.
For the destruction of the state of Israel. You're not glorifying Hamas, PFLP, and Islamic Jihad. You're not doing all these things. And if you are, then you go raise money from Qatar and not from the EU or USAID or any one government. And that is where what we focus on highlighting why that is important, showing them that they have been systematically doing that and how much money they have actually not only wasted from their taxpayers' pockets, but actually how that money has fueled the hatred and only created an even bigger whirlpool. So
more violence, more terror, more deaths.
Exactly.
So what was the response in your meetings with the officials there when you tell them this information and about the basic demand that I'm sure on many of their other projects they do have strings attached. You want this funding A, B, C, and D, so what was the responses to are they going to do it? They're not going to do it? Asking questions.
First of all, it's important to note they don't have strings attached anywhere.
Anywhere, and any funding.
The article that was published this morning in Euractiv, which is one of the two main papers in Brussels, basically exposed this en masse EU funding to NGOs, environmental NGOs, so completely different side of the political spectrum to the NGOs that we're talking, right? Where they called them NGOs, whereas they were comprised of only governmental officials from different countries and different, basically lobby groups, right? And interest groups, where there was no transparency, no accountability, no one knew where it's going, no one knew. And this is EU funded, right? So there's a huge debate in Brussels right now, because don't forget, the European Parliament is a parliament comprised of the members of the parliaments from the member states, reflective of the elections results in each country. European continent has been steadily going towards the right, and that is now in the new parliament is reflected. And a lot of these elected officials are asking more checks and balances and more, what are we doing? Why are we spending so much money? So that's just on that. It's not an anomaly only for us. It's disproportionate here. The amount of money compared to the size of the conflict, population affected, the death toll, no matter which metrics you apply, is crazy, right? But just like in the media, they like to obsess about Israel and exactly. But in terms of the phenomenon, it's very universal.
Got it.
But when I do talk, and there is a shift of atmosphere. Typically, I would go to Brussels and sit with the administration, right? And I would say, look at this, your funding is going to a terror-affiliated group. Look at that. And they would just say, yes, but the occupation and the settler violence. And I'm like, I'm not a representative of the state of Israel. I'm not talking about, they wouldn't even entertain the conversation. This time, they listened. We met with more highest level officials than ever before. I think they do understand that if they don't change, there will be no role for them to play here.
Interesting.
And two, the October the 7th and everything that's happened is still fresh enough. We're moving away from that, just like we've seen in the media. Like most of the media attention is yet again on Gaza and the Gazan population, and the hostages are almost never mentioned. And not only the hostages, but even October the 7th is not mentioned. They'll say, in the current round of violence, where did the violence come from? But they do understand on a political level that they cannot just ignore it. Now, the question is, what are they going to do about it? Whether the changes will be cosmetic, or will they really do something? In July last year, the EU signed a letter of intent with the Palestinian Authority, basically saying the EU funding to the Palestinian Authority is conditioned to a reform that the PA has to make. And the reform deals with the pay for slay, with textbooks and funding to organizations, and by and large, so it doesn't go to the terror affiliated organizations. Or now, the last time, that was in July 2024. They're meeting next Monday on April the 14th. And we have to see now whether it will be just a photo op, right? Well, they shake hands, or is anyone going to say they're meeting with the Council on Foreign Relations, which is basically the foreign ministers of all the member states. So it's a big deal, the meeting, and we have to see if anyone will come out and say, what have you done since July? Where's the progress report? And then turn to the European Commission, which is the executive branch of the European Union, and say, have you demanded of them predefined milestones, right? What are we doing to actually track any of these reforms? So I think there's it's a pretty opportune time for us in Brussels. The official Jerusalem has pretty much said what it has to say, and they complain in all the meetings. They said the Israeli government won't let us enter Gaza to even see what's going on. There is now the revision by the Israeli government of the humanitarian visas that are being issued, because for decades the Israeli government just gave out humanitarian visas for all these representatives and organizations, and they would come and go to the checkpoints and take photos of our soldiers, and then send them around the world saying, here's an evidence of them systematically violating, rights of the Palestinian people and so on. And then they would send lawyers to flood the Israeli Supreme Court with lawsuits and files and so on. So for the first time, the Israeli government revised completely who is going to be given the humanitarian visa and under what conditions and what they need to commit to, right? So they feel that Jerusalem is sending very strong messages. At the same time, Jerusalem also, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs officially said, we will be engaging with what is considered in Europe far-right political parties. Right. So they feel it, and they're being shaken by it. Now it begs the question, what is their answer going to be?
Right. No, and that's very interesting that you brought up that point, because the Minister of Diaspora Affairs and Fighting Antisemitism, Amichai Shikli, just had a Fighting Antisemitism conference in Jerusalem, which caused headlines because he invited some of these European politicians on the right side of the map, who voices within the Jewish establishment world were very upset, and they pulled out, saying, how can you invite these politicians? And again, I don't know who these individual politicians are, but I actually went public and wrote my own op-ed about the topic, saying, wait a second, he's inviting the politicians within Europe who are actually standing up against the growing Jew hatred, growing anti-Israel sentiment, while everyone complaining, where have you been about the silence that the more liberal political left governments, our allies, have, whether actively assisted by all this NGO funding or not actively assisted, the growth of Jew hatred under their watches, while saying that they're our allies. And we have to reach out to anyone who wants to be an ally, while also understanding that the Jew hatred, it's not just about us in Israel, it's about a destructive process taking place in their own countries. So I'm all for Minister Shikli inviting those who are our allies, not just for our benefit, but to help their countries as well. So it's interesting that you brought that up.
I think it's a very interesting example that you bring up, and I'll say two things about that. I think that we need to be cognizant of the concerns that many of the Jewish organizations have around the world. Many of the parties that the elected officials that were invited come from and represent have a history of anti-Semitism and white supremacy and Nazi regimes and so on. Yet every one of them that was invited has been extremely vocal in support of Israel and, fight of anti-Semitism. I think it's important to engage with all those who say that they want to fight anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is not reserved to right or left. It's the oldest and the most universal hatred. It's a virus that affects all parts of the political, spectrum. And I'll quote Silver Adams, who said on the stage at that conference, he said the following. He turned to Le Pen's granddaughter, right? And Le Pen being the far-right French party, her grandfather was a staunch anti-Semite, right? And he said to her, if you are genuine about fighting anti-Semitism, then we are with you. And that would be my message to the ones on the left and to the ones on the right.
100%.
As Israelis, we don't elect in this government, we don't vote in these countries. It's not mine to comment who they elected. I can, as an individual, I can have an opinion, just like I have when it comes to Israeli politics.
Right.
But we need to fight anti-Semitism on the right and on the left. And I will say the following with responsibility. I am not belittling the anti-Semitism coming from the far right. I am not saying that there is no neo-Nazis and white supremacists and crazy people on the far right. Yet that one is regulated around the world. When a neo-Nazi walks around the streets or, attacks someone and propagates his neo-Nazi propaganda, everyone in our respective societies knows to recognize it for what it is.
Right.
And the laws know how to sanction it. When it comes to the anti-Semitism that is coming from the far left, that is sometimes disguised as anti-Zionism, sometimes as criticism of the state of Israel. All these fancy words, right? Our legislators and our societies still are clueless in terms of how to properly identify it and call it by its name, let alone regulate or legally persecute. And that is, to my mind, the key point, because we will never eradicate all haters, whichever part of the political spectrum they come from. There's always going to be crazy people, and there's always going to be people who hate. The only thing we can do is regulate the public space and make sure that they are fully aware that should they be caught red-handed, there will be sanctions. And that's where so in that sense, what Silver Adams, the new president of the World Jewish Congress in Israel said is, if you are genuine about fighting anti-Semitism, then I'm with you.
Right. No, and the point you made is a very important one. I've spoken about it as well. And it's really differentiating the fact that, yes, if anyone, at least today, things can still change, but at least today, if anyone wants to be a politician, let's say in America, and he very much is a supporter of neo-Nazi, far-right, all that stuff, he will be belittled, he will be delegitimized. Most probably he won't be able to get past the primaries. Whereas on the left, we have the squad and a lot of support for the squad within the Democratic establishment party system apparatus in Washington. And that's accepted without any of the same conditions, backlash, delegitimization that exists on
And let me take you back to the very beginning of our conversation. All in the name of human rights.
Right, all in the name of human rights. And you know what? One last topic I want to talk to you about. Since we went across the sea to America anyway. Because as NGO Monitor, you also monitor a lot of the nonprofit organizations that are funding a lot of the anti-Israel, anti-Semitic activities on U.S. college campuses. Mm-hmm. And I'm just going to throw some little examples out there of how things didn't look right to many of us on the outside just looking in. And we were like, wait a second, why are all these college campus campouts, protests, look exactly the same? The same tents, the same everything, whatever.
And overnight.
It's just there. And people think, oh, it's spontaneous. Spontaneous college campus protests against Israel overnight. October 7th it started. Didn't even wait till October 8th. And it's important for people to understand, this I'm just putting it for the audience, the Israeli army, we did not start our offensive for like 2-3 weeks later. So all those anti-Israel protests that began on October 7th and October 8th were total support for genocide against Israel and the massacre of Jews and support for Hamas without any complaints about what Israel is doing in Gaza or poor Gazans. And a lot of it came from nonprofit funding. So can you talk about this?
Absolutely. So as you say, there was nothing organic or spontaneous about the encampments or in general the Jew hatred and Jew violence that erupted after October the 7th. I think, and I've said this many times since October the 7th, as bad as we had it here in Israel, I really identified with the Jewish community, our brothers and sisters around the world, because I think that how isolated they felt and how mortified many of them felt.
And shocked out of nowhere.
And shocked. And you know, it's interesting that you use the word shocked, because when I spoke to my European friends, they were mortified. They were taking down their mezuzahs, etc. But in Europe, European Jews are sadly used to a certain level of anti-Semitism in their societies, as this is what it is.
Right.
The North American Jewish community was completely caught.
Called like deer caught in the headline.
Exactly. And this is part of a very well coordinated, very well financially, but not only financially fueled campaign, where the students demonstrating on campuses were just the crowd that was lured and mobilized by using romantic slogans about something that most of them are completely ignorant. And we've all seen these videos, right, where they say from which river to which sea, and
right.
None of them could.
They don't know what they're talking about.
They don't know what they're talking about. But, you know, they use the big words justice and liberate.
Globalize the Intifada.
Decolonize and so on and so on. We mapped out the NGOs, the organizations that were active on the campuses. And we mapped out at least, at some point we had to stop, 157 organizations. And we categorized them. Some of them were grassroots, so mobilizing the crowd. Some of them were the legal groups that providing legal representation and also doing lawfare, filing lawsuits to overwhelm the system and abuse the legal system in the US and Canada. Some of them were research groups, so they were the ones who would issue reports or statements. The others would share and reshare and use as resources and sources, right? And some of them were fundraising, because when we a more interesting exercise actually than mapping them out was to map out the connections between them, and we found more than 2,000 connections between them, showing that they all lead to 3 or 4 same fiscal sponsors.
Wow.
So
can you name the fiscal sponsors?
Well, there's some of them are Rockefeller Brothers and the Open Society, and If Not Now, and a few charity funds. Like it's the same groups, and they all fund them, and there's absolutely no transparency. You don't know how much, you don't know to whom. It's deliberately done so, because they wanted the broader public to get an idea, to get an image that it's en masse, and that it organically just exploded as a popular expression of frustration. But none of it was spontaneous, and it was not only was it not spontaneous, it was complementary to all these other things. ICC and ICJ, I should say this, that in the South African claim against Israel in the International Court of Justice last winter, right, in The Hague, where South Africa, South Africa accused Israel of apartheid, there were 26 footnotes leading to NGO reports as original sources of systematic violations of human rights, blah, blah, blah. As my little son calls it, blah, 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 NGOs, literally. And oftentimes that's what it is. But when you put it in a legal, convolvulent language, and you use the word international law many times, then it turns out into a submission to the United Nations, to the International Court of Criminal Court, and so on. And when there's volume, then it's a campaign, and it shapes the minds and the hearts of the broader public that is not informed enough.
So let me ask you this: knowing that there is a new sheriff in town in the United States with a Trump administration, are you already in touch with administration officials there in terms of tackling all of that funding from the danger. And again, the message I give when I'm in Washington meeting with the politicians there and to my public is that the growth of anti-Semitism is not just about the Jews. It's a cancer that is out to destroy their societies. So if you care about America, which I'm in America right now, you want to take care of this and stop it and stop the funding of all this radicalization, because all this anti-Semitism is also anti-Americanism, about the destruction of America. So have you found that there is who to talk to and they're actually going after these things in the NGOs? And
absolutely. I mean, we've been briefing. We brief all administrations. We were active also with the previous one, but obviously after Trump administration came, the sheriff came into town, there has been much more appetite and readiness to look into these things. But not only readiness, but also relevance, right? Because this is like, he has issued so many executive orders dealing exactly with these issues.
Right.
Now, it's a challenge because the USAID reform, which you would think is perfect for us, is so much bigger than the Middle East and what they fund with the Palestinians. So we try to make our research part of a bigger agenda, but we're briefing them. We are plugged into the broader conversations on anti-Semitism in the U.S. We're also plugged into the conversations surrounding the campuses. Based on, we demand transparency, who funds these groups, who is able to operate on a campus, use open source information. I haven't said that. All our research is based on publicly available information with a reason. We want to be able to sit in front of an elected official and say, if we can Google it, you can Google it too. You don't need special intelligence
to know this information.
Agencies to know this. So we are working very closely with the administration now and feeding them information and contextualizing it also, because another thing that we do, we also put it in the broader legislative context of each country. Each country has different existing vetting mechanisms, different loopholes, different challenges, different legislative system. Appropriation system in the States is different than how a budgetary system in different European countries looks like. So we are experts on this issue, and then we will give specific policy recommendations in the context of each country. And I can, before we started filming, you asked me if I think that the situation has changed.
Right. Things are getting better, right?
I think the fact that their attacks are getting more aggressive is a testimony to the fact that we are causing them
to get more aggressive.
Yeah, and they feel that they have to. I think that let's go back to the superpowers, as our founder and president, Professor Jill Steinberg, calls them, the Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. I think everyone knows now that they're completely illegit and that they don't fight for human rights anywhere in the world, but most certainly not in Israel and in the context of the conflict here. But even for the rest, just by and large NGOs, I do think that the public knows that they shouldn't trust blindly. They know better than 20 years ago. But very tangibly, our research helped cut in the last 5 years over $150 million in governmental funding to anti-Israel NGOs alone. And I say at least because there's no transparency. So this is what we can actually account for. We have a table that we follow this. But more importantly, 18 countries around the world in the last 5 years have changed and tightened their NGO funding policies, basically conditioned it. So more and more, we're not there yet, Toto, but more and more governments understand that you need to put strings, to attach strings to the funding, and also you need to check very carefully who you entrust with promoting human rights or defending human rights or providing humanitarian aid. Anyone who does not recognize Israel's right to exist today, or anyone who glorifies or celebrates terrorism or terror attacks or calls for the destruction of the state of Israel, must not get aid money or be the distributor of aid. That's the lowest common denominator today, to my mind.
So to end this really, really important and fabulous talk with you, Olga, on a Jewish note, as we're in the Jewish month of Nisan, the holiday of Passover, the holiday of the Jewish redemption. What words of optimism do you have to give over to the audience today?
Well, I do like to always finish on a celebratory note, and I like to I refer to Pesach as an additional New Year's, right? A Jewish New Year, and I think in many ways it is the Happy New Year as opposed to Rosh Hashanah, which is a sober and serious one. My positive note is always the same. We already won. We have a state. We have a thriving, beautiful state with beautiful people in it, and as horrible as October the 7th has been, the beauty of the people shined so strongly as the antithesis to the massacre right after, immediately. That does not mean we don't have existential threats to fight, but we already won, and we need to we just need to keep celebrating that and defending our right to preserve exactly that. We are tasked as people of being light onto the nation, and many non-Jews think that it's some superiority thing, but it's actually a tremendous responsibility, right? To have a better society, to have a more responsible community, to be a better neighbor, to be a better everything, to give charity, as a mitzvah. And I think that is, we just have to defend the right to keep doing that. And I think that there's nothing more meaningful than a Passover Seder to celebrate that, and pray for the rest of our brothers and sisters in Gaza to return. That is
Amen. And to just add to that, because I agree with everything you said, the work that NGO Monitor is so important in terms of exposing more information out there for people to know. And so many people, they're like, no, I don't want to know the bad news. I don't want to stay away. No, I don't want to know about the corruption. I don't want to know about the politics. No. But no, it's important to know these things, but don't look at it don't get depressed about it, but be empowered by it. Oh my God, no, by all of these different issues being exposed. That's how we get to better. Power. Right, and it's the exposure of the bad that we're able to allow ourselves and be active and partner with the powers to make things better, whether in terms of the Jewish people, whether in terms of Israel, whether in terms of humanity and everyone's governments, America, Europe, whatever. So the work you do is so important on that front as well. So thank you for a fabulous talk. Thank you for the amazing work you do. And Chag Kasher v'Sameach. It should be a wonderful, redemptive holiday of Passover.
Chag Sameach v'Kasher, and thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. We on here?
No, there's no room left.
Okay, so put it over there. All right, wait a second. Not yet. Final thoughts? And then we're done.
How about you?
Tell me when.
Yeah. 5, 4, 3, 2, go.
That's it, everybody, for another episode of The Pulse of Israel. I hope you come out of this talk not just informed, but more empowered and more inspired. And if you want more information about the very, very important work that NGO Monitor does, just go to ngomonitor.org. There we go, ngomonitor.org for more information. Sign up for the newsletter and be able to be part of, yes, this is a revolution of the people taking ownership after we've subcontracted all these years to governments and willfully trusted them. No. They are not leaders. They are followers. We vote for them to then do what we vote them to do. You want them to be better with the money? Well, be active and tell them to do better at what they do with our taxpayer money. If you are not yet a subscriber to our daily, belief-based, inspiring, politically incorrect, truthful videos about Israel, the Jewish people, and the freedom-loving world, what are you waiting for? Go to pulseofisrael.com and click to subscribe today. And yes, we are a donor-based operation. We need your donations for support in order to make these videos and get our videos seen and do all the work we do. So every once in a while, whether a large donation or a small donation, just go to pulseofisrael.com and click on the donate button. Shalom, everyone, and thanks for watching.
Pulse of Israel, frontline videos from the Holy Land. Support our work by donating today.